In the peaceful town of Fairview Park, Ohio, the summer of 1981 was forever marked by tragedy. Three beloved teenage sisters vanished without a trace during a cheerful community gathering. Nearly 3 decades later, their father, haunted by grief, stumbles upon a disturbing detail in an old family photograph, a discovery that reignites hope, fear, and suspicion. What truly happened to Anna, Julie, and Lisa Collins on that fateful day? What dark secret had been hidden for 27 years? Fairview Park, Ohio, July 17, 1981. It was a warm and bright afternoon, filled with the comforting buzz of cicadas and the laughter of neighborhood children. The small city of Fairview Park seemed to breathe happiness, welcoming yet another cheerful community festival at the Fairview Community Pool Club. Families streamed into the club carrying coolers filled with homemade sandwiches, fresh lemonade, and colorful towels draped casually over their shoulders. Red, white, and blue decorations adorned every corner, fluttering gently in the summer breeze. The air was scented with chlorine and sunscreen, mixed with the sweet aroma of cotton candy and freshly grilled hamburgers. At the heart of this vibrant celebration were 3 16-year-old identical sisters, Anna, Julie, and Lisa Collins. With their curly blonde hair catching the golden sunlight and their identical emerald eyes sparkling with teenage joy, the Collins triplets were the darlings of Fairview. Today, they were especially radiant, each dressed in light summer dresses, Anna's pale blue, Julie's floral yellow, and Lisa's soft lavender, reflecting their distinct personalities. Anna, quiet and thoughtful, watched the festivities closely from under a large oak tree, clutching her journal tightly. She scribbled thoughtfully, her red ribbon bracelet glowing faintly against her pale wrist. Her gentle smile hid the dreams of becoming a writer one day, capturing the world around her through words that spoke louder than her voice ever could. Julie, carefree and vivacious, laughed out loud near the diving board, challenging her friends to daring jumps into the sparkling blue water. Her bright laughter was contagious, drawing a cheerful crowd. Barefoot, as always, Julie embraced every moment with a kind of fearless joy that made others admire her bravery or recklessness. Lisa stood nearby, observant and protective, carefully watching her sisters. Though outwardly confident, Lisa hid a deep-seated fear of water behind her calm demeanor. She adjusted her red headband nervously whenever Julie plunged into the pool, silently hoping for her safety. Lisa dreamed of becoming a counselor or teacher, determined to guide and protect others as she always did for her sisters. George Collins watched his daughters from a distance, his gentle eyes filled with quiet pride and love. As a widowed father and former history teacher, George devoted his life entirely to the triplets. Despite their adolescent quarrels and typical teenage drama, their bond was unbreakable. But beneath the surface of family harmony, small daily tensions lingered, mostly around curfews, boys, and differing opinions about independence. As the afternoon wore on, the party's energy heightened. Teenagers danced enthusiastically near the makeshift DJ booth playing hits from Blondie, Rio Speedwagon, and Queen. Younger children splashed noisily in the shallow pool under watchful parental gazes. Older residents chatted contentedly, reminiscing about past summers. Everything was perfectly ordinary, yet blissfully extraordinary. But slowly, unnoticed by anyone at first, the Collins sisters drifted apart through the crowd, each absorbed in their own experiences. Anna walked towards a quieter section of the club to write peacefully. Julie joined friends who had gathered around the snack stand. Lisa, momentarily losing sight of her sisters, became uneasy and began to search the crowd, her anxious eyes scanning the festive chaos. As the sun began to dip lower, bathing the pool in an amber glow, George started to sense something was off. A father's instinct, perhaps. He called softly for the girls, his voice casual yet tinged with growing unease. Minutes passed without reply. He walked briskly, heart quickening slightly. No sign of Anna near the oak tree. Julie was no longer by the snack stand. Lisa had vanished from the poolside. The club's joyous sounds became faint and muffled, replaced by the quiet rush of blood in his ears. George's steps quickened to urgent strides, anxiety tightening in his chest as the reality slowly set in. His daughters were nowhere to be found. Guests noticed George's agitation and soon joined him in the search, calling out the girls' names. Confusion spread rapidly through the crowd, laughter fading into tense whispers, smiles dissolving into coo. Worried glances, nightfall deepened swiftly, bathing the festive decorations in eerie shadows cast by dimming string lights. Panic rose sharply as the community club, once lively and joyful, descended into fearful uncertainty. The police were called, their sirens slicing harshly through the previously peaceful summer night, in the frantic chaos. George stood paralyzed at the pool's edge, heart pounding painfully. His gaze froze on a glint of something familiar lying discarded near the pool's edge. Shaking, he stepped forward, knees weakening as he recognized the 3 identical tiaras his daughters had worn to the festival. Abandoned carelessly, they lay shimmering quietly under the flickering pool lights. His breath caught painfully in his throat. But as George kneeled, his blood ran cold at the sight of something far more sinister. Clearly visible adult footprints, large and deliberate, imprinted heavily into the damp earth, leading ominously away from the pool area and disappearing into tearing. The darkness. George lifted his eyes slowly, staring helplessly into the shadowed distance, overcome by horror, grief, and dread. His daughters were gone, taken by someone unseen, leaving behind only fading laughter, abandoned tiaras, and terrifying footprints that marked the end of innocence. In that moment, Fairview Park's perfect day shattered irrevocably, plunging the Collins family and the entire community into a darkness far deeper and colder than the night around them. In the days following the disappearance of his daughters, George Collins felt as though he had fallen into an endless nightmare from which he could never awaken. Each sunrise seemed like a cruel mockery, a painful reminder that time relentlessly marched forward, indifferent to his loss. His world had shrunk to the silence of an empty home, the whispered condolences of neighbors, and the monotonous ticking of the grandfather clock in his hallway. The initial weeks were a blur of relentless searches, press conferences, and painful interrogations. The Fairview Park police combed through every inch of the community, questioning everyone and investigating countless leads. But as days turned into weeks and then months, hope gradually faded, leaving behind a hollow emptiness in George's heart. George withdrew from everything that had once brought him joy. His passion for teaching history at Fairview High School dimmed, his lectures becoming monotone and disjointed. Concerned colleagues watched helplessly as the vibrant educator they once knew slipped further away each day, until the school gently but firmly asked him to take leave, citing concerns for his emotional health. George didn't fight the decision. He no longer had the energy to argue. The Collins family home, once a lively center of warmth and laughter, grew silent and cold. Every room had become a haunting reminder of the vibrant lives once lived within its walls. Anna's journals lay untouched on her desk, her favorite red ribbon marking a half-written poem, its ink fading over the passing years. Julie's room remained in joyous disarray, sneakers abandoned beside her bed, posters of rock bands curling at the edges. Lisa's careful tidiness endured, her textbooks still stacked neatly, as if waiting for her return. George had never had the strength to touch any of their belongings, preserving their rooms exactly as they had left them, a museum of memories frozen in time. His routine became one of painful predictability. Each morning, he rose from restless sleep, brewed coffee he never tasted, and sat silently at the kitchen table, staring blankly out the window. He would then wander the empty rooms, trailing his fingers gently over surfaces, as if he could still feel the echoes of his daughter's laughter. On countless nights, the overwhelming weight of loneliness drove George to stand at the edge of the Fairview community pool, staring into the silent, moonlit water, tormented by the unanswered questions that haunted him. As years passed, the community slowly moved on, the initial sympathy giving way to quiet avoidance. The disappearance of the Collins sisters became a story whispered less frequently, buried beneath layers of everyday life. But George remained stuck, a ghost haunting his own existence, his grief as fresh as the day he first found those abandoned tiaras by the pool. Across town, Sarah Campbell grew up with memories of the Collins sisters deeply embedded in her heart. She had only been 9 years old at the time of their disappearance, but the event left an indelible mark on her. Sarah remembered vividly how the vibrant summer festivities had suddenly turned into confusion and fear, a transformation she never quite understood at that tender age. The image of George Collins's grief-stricken face remained etched in her mind, fueling her lifelong desire to seek justice for the innocent. As Sarah matured, her fascination with the case deepened into genuine determination. Driven by compassion and a sense of duty, she pursued a career in law enforcement, becoming one of Fairview Park's youngest detectives. Although she investigated countless other cases, her thoughts often drifted back to that warm July evening, the unsolved mystery lingering unresolved in her mind. Meanwhile, George continued living in solitude. He lost contact with friends, distant relatives, and eventually even neighbors. His days blended into a gray haze, each one indistinguishable from the next. Only on rare occasions would he venture into town, where familiar faces avoided eye contact, their uncomfortable glances reminding him of the burden he represented, a permanent reminder of a tragedy no one could explain or fix. Years turned into decades, and the once vibrant man became frail, his hair turning fully silver, his eyes perpetually clouded by sadness. His only comfort came from carefully preserving memories, every photograph, letter, and trinket carefully stored in boxes labeled with dates and names. On a particularly gloomy autumn day in 2008, George experienced an overwhelming emotional breakdown triggered by an old news story broadcast on television about another family's tragedy. Tears long suppressed burst forth uncontrollably, forcing him to retreat into the basement, a dark and cluttered space he rarely visited. Surrounded by shadows and stacked memories, he collapsed onto the dusty floor, overcome by sorrow. After a few moments, George's gaze fell upon a worn cardboard box he hadn't opened in years. With shaking hands, he carefully lifted its lid, releasing the scent of aged paper and forgotten days. Inside, hundreds of photographs lay, carefully stacked images capturing moments he once cherished and now could barely bear to remember. Slowly, George began sifting through them. Pictures of birthdays, Christmas mornings, summer picnics, moments filled with smiles and innocence. Tears blurred his vision, yet he continued, driven by a desperate need to reconnect with something precious he had lost. Then, unexpectedly, George's fingers stopped, frozen by something peculiar in a photograph taken at the community pool on the day his daughters vanished. His breathing quickened as he brought the picture closer. Standing far in the background, partially obscured by shadows and blurred slightly by distance, was the figure of a man, his gaze unmistakably fixed on Anna, Julie, and Lisa. George's heart raced painfully as he squinted at the image, a creeping sense of dread making his blood run cold. He knew this man, though he couldn't yet place exactly how or why. A terrible feeling settled heavily within him. This stranger had been there that day, hidden in plain sight, unnoticed for 27 long years. His hands trembled violently as he held the photograph, his heart pounding deafeningly loud in his ears. After decades of unanswered questions, there was finally something concrete, something terrifying that could reignite hope and uncover the truth. The forgotten basement became suddenly suffocating as George realized the full implications of his discovery. This photograph could change everything. Determined yet terrified, he knew there was only one person in Fairview he could trust with this startling new clue: the young detective, who had grown up haunted by the very mystery that had destroyed his life. The years of quiet agony, the frozen in time bedrooms, the silent suffering, all crystallized in that single moment of painful clarity. George Collins rose slowly, gripping the photograph tightly in his trembling hands, feeling an energy he hadn't felt in decades, the faint glimmer of purpose, mixed with a resurgence of hope and fear intertwined. Little did George know this simple discovery would soon unravel deeply buried secrets and bring forth revelations darker and more profound than he had ever imagined. The morning after discovering the unsettling photograph, George Collins found himself anxiously pacing in front of the Fairview Park police station. He hadn't visited the station since the frantic days after his daughters vanished. The building hadn't changed much in 27 years. It still carried the same oppressive air, heavy with a silence that whispered of unresolved grief. Detective Sarah Campbell had just finished briefing a team of officers when she spotted George standing alone by the entrance, clutching something tightly in his hands. A wave of compassion filled her heart as she quickly approached him, remembering vividly the devastation she'd witnessed on his face during her childhood. "Mr. Collins," Sarah said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Please, come inside." In the privacy of her small office, George handed Sarah the photograph. His voice trembled as he explained, "I don't know how I missed it before. He's just standing there, watching." Sarah studied the picture intently, her experienced eyes carefully scanning the shadowed figure lurking in the background. A chill crept down her spine. She knew instantly this discovery could reopen old wounds for the entire community, yet she also sensed it was their best chance at finally uncovering the truth. "We'll reopen the case," Sarah said firmly, meeting George's hopeful yet frightened gaze. "I'll do everything I can." Within days, the Fairview Police Department formally announced the reopening of the Collins sisters' case. The quiet town was thrust once again into a whirlwind of emotions. Decades-old memories resurfaced with powerful intensity, reviving both sympathy and anxiety. The community, uncertain whether to feel hope or dread, watched uneasily as police set up interviews, reviewed old statements, and combed through evidence neglected for years. Sarah meticulously re-examined every file. Stacks of documents filled her desk, testimonies both familiar and previously overlooked demanding her attention. Her first priority was identifying the mysterious man in the photograph. She sent it to experts for digital enhancement, hoping desperately for clarity. Meanwhile, she systematically re-interviewed witnesses, many of whom were now elderly, their memories dimmed but still tinged with haunting clarity. Mrs. Elizabeth Harmon, a longtime neighbor, hesitantly recounted seeing a white van parked strangely near the pool club that evening in 1981. "I told the officer back then," she insisted, frustration and sadness coloring her voice, "but they seemed convinced it was irrelevant." Sarah dug deeper into this overlooked clue, discovering several others who'd noted the white van but whose accounts had been dismissed or simply lost. Each new revelation deepened Sarah's concern and determination, tracing the ownership records. Allied Sarah to the Jenkins family, a revelation that shook her profoundly. Robert Jenkins, brother-in-law to George, uncle to the missing girls, had never before been seriously questioned, viewed primarily as a grieving family member. But the white van was unquestionably linked to him. Sarah decided cautiously to keep this discovery discreet initially, wanting concrete proof before confronting the family directly. But the path was clear. She needed to search the abandoned Jenkins property near the Rocky River, a place rumored locally as haunted and long avoided by residents. On an overcast afternoon, Sarah, accompanied by a specialized forensic team, approached the Jenkins estate. Decades of neglect were evident in every cracked window pane and peeling paint. A rusted metal gate creaked ominously as they entered the overgrown yard. The house stood silent and forbidding, the quiet occasionally broken by the whispering wind and rustling leaves. Behind the decaying barn sat the faded outline of a vehicle hidden beneath a rotting tarp. Sarah's pulse quickened as the officers pulled back the heavy cover, revealing an old, white van, just as described by multiple witnesses. A wave of apprehension washed over her as she examined the license plates, confirming without doubt it belonged to Robert Jenkins. The team painstakingly began to search the van, combing every inch for evidence. Sarah watched anxiously, her mind racing with countless unsettling possibilities. Hours passed slowly, the fading daylight casting eerie shadows across the property. Just as Sarah began to lose hope of finding anything meaningful, one of the forensic officers called out sharply, signaling her over to the rear of the van. There, beneath layers of dust and debris, lay small, painfully familiar objects. Sarah recognized them instantly: 3 delicate silver bracelets, engraved lovingly with the names Anna, Julie, and Lisa. Sarah's breath caught painfully in her throat. Her heart raced as the realization struck her with full force. These were undeniably the bracelets the Collins sisters wore the day they vanished. Silence settled heavily over the team, broken only by the distant murmur of the river. Sarah carefully sealed the bracelets into an evidence bag, her hands trembling slightly with shock and disbelief. The implications were chilling. Robert Jenkins, a close family member, had somehow been deeply involved in the girl's disappearance. Returning to the police station, Sarah found George Collins waiting anxiously. The raw hope in his eyes cut deeply into her heart as she gently relayed their discovery. George visibly staggered under the weight of betrayal and confusion. How could he have missed such danger lurking within his own family? His anguish reignited Sarah's resolve. They had come too far now to stop. No matter how painful, they had to press forward. The revelation quickly spread throughout Fairview, shocking the community. Robert Jenkins, respected but always somewhat aloof, became the center of whispered conversations. Suddenly, every past action and behavior was scrutinized, reinterpreted in the harsh new light of suspicion. The community struggled to reconcile their fond memories of Robert with the horrifying possibility of his involvement. For Sarah, the discovery deeply shook her personally. She vividly recalled Jenkins as quiet, reserved, never one to draw attention. But perhaps, she thought bitterly, that was precisely why no one had ever suspected him. His very ordinariness had shielded him, allowing secrets to hide undetected in plain sight. George, meanwhile, grappled with a fresh wave of guilt and sorrow. Had he overlooked signs out of blind trust or family loyalty? The unanswered questions tore at him, deepening the wound that had never healed. Despite emotional exhaustion, Sarah and George knew this new evidence demanded immediate confrontation. Robert Jenkins needed to be questioned directly, his responses carefully analyzed for hidden truths or deception. Time had weakened memories, but Sarah felt certain that the imminent interrogation could finally bring clarity to a decades-long mystery. That night, George sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, clutching the photograph once more. The figure at the edge haunted him relentlessly. Could it truly be Robert? His heart ached with dread at the thought that someone so trusted, someone bound by blood, could be the architect of such profound pain. Sarah, back at her office, meticulously prepared for Jenkins' interrogation, reviewing every detail uncovered. Thus far, the weight of responsibility rested heavily upon her shoulders. The case that had initially inspired her career now tested her emotional resilience, confronting her with painful truths about the darkness humans could harbor. Meanwhile, deep within the quiet shadows of Fairview Park, an old community secretly braced itself. Each resident sensing intuitively that the reopening of the Collins sisters' case was only beginning to unravel a complex web of secrets, hidden loyalties, and unspoken guilt. Little did they know, this was only the tip of the iceberg. Far darker revelations waited quietly in the shadows, ready to emerge and forever alter the fabric of their lives. The interrogation room at Fairview Police Station was suffocatingly quiet, the stillness broken only by the gentle hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Robert Jenkins sat hunched over, visibly shaken, eyes fixed nervously on the scratched surface of the table. Detective Sarah Campbell observed him carefully from across the table, noticing how age had deepened lines on his weary face. Beside her, George Collins sat stiffly, his expression a blend of disbelief, betrayal, and desperate hope. Sarah began calmly, softly, breaking the tense silence. "Robert, we found the bracelets belonging to the girls. They were in your van. Help uns understand how they got there." Robert's eyes shot up, widened in shock, confusion spilling from every glance. "I swear I didn't hurt them," he whispered hoarsely, voice strained with emotion. "I could never," George interrupted sharply, his voice filled with years of anguish. "Then why were there things hidden in your van, Robert? Explain that." Robert shook his head vigorously, despair shadowing his features. "I lent the van to someone else. It wasn't me, George. Please, you've got to believe me." "Who?" Sarah pressed urgently, maintaining her calm demeanor despite her racing pulse. Robert hesitated, his hands trembling. "Patrick Miller, the swimming coach at the community pool. He asked to borrow it for a couple of days around that time. He said he needed to transport equipment." George's breath halted painfully. Patrick Miller had always seemed so kind, so trustworthy. The thought of him being involved sent a cold chill through George's bones. "Patrick Miller?" George echoed. Weakly, he was respected, beloved, everyone admired him. Robert met his brother-in-law's gaze, pleading silently for belief. "I had no idea he could ever be capable of something like that. I never suspected anything sinister." Sarah immediately sensed the gravity of Robert's revelation. "Robert, why didn't you ever mention this before?" Robert lowered his head, guilt clouding his expression. "I was scared. Terrified you'd think it was me. My own nieces ... disappearing like that. I knew how it would look. So I stayed quiet, praying the truth would somehow come out without implicating me." A long silence followed his words. Sarah exchanged a heavy glance with George. The family complexities added painful layers of emotion to the investigation. Sarah delved deeper into Patrick Miller's background immediately afterward. Old archives at Fairview High and the local library began revealing unsettling fragments of Miller's hidden life. What started as admiration in obituaries and tributes soon unraveled into disturbing accounts of quiet complaints from female students' complaints, disregarded as misunderstandings or exaggerations at the time. George struggled with his memories of Patrick Miller, remembering the charismatic man who always had a ready smile, an encouraging word. Yet now, George questioned every interaction he'd ever witnessed between Miller and his daughters. How had he missed the signs? Sarah arranged interviews with several former students and community members who remembered Patrick. The first was Christine Moore, now in her 50s, whose face turned pale at Patrick's name. "He was charming," she whispered. "But sometimes he'd look at us, at girls, in a way that made us uncomfortable. We just never felt safe to say anything." Another witness, Mark Reynolds, recalled seeing Miller lingering near the pool after practices, often taking photographs of the students. He claimed it was for the school's archives, Mark explained hesitantly, but it always seemed off. He spent far too much time watching specific girls. With each testimony, a clearer yet more horrifying picture formed. Patrick Miller, beneath his charismatic exterior, concealed disturbing obsessions. Sarah carefully documented every detail, each revelation driving a deeper wedge into the fabric of innocence Fairview once cherished. During a late evening at the station, Sarah and George reviewed all gathered evidence meticulously, pinpointing Miller's movements around the time of the girl's disappearance. Records indicated he'd purchased property years later on the outskirts of town, a remote house hidden deep in woods, overlooked during earlier investigations due to his flawless community reputation. Early the next morning, Sarah, George, and a small investigative team headed toward Miller's isolated property. George's anxiety heightened as they approached the decaying house, its dark windows staring blankly, its wooden structure sagging from neglect. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked softly, sensing George's unease. "I have to be," George replied, steeling himself against the dread tightening in his chest. Stepping cautiously inside, they were immediately greeted by silence and the thick scent of mold. Shafts of pale sunlight penetrated broken shutters, illuminating layers of dust coating old furniture, forgotten newspapers, and faded photographs scattered across the floor. Sarah studied the photos carefully, her heart sinking as she recognized images of the Collins sisters. They appeared unaware, smiling innocently, oblivious to the sinister gaze capturing them from a distance. George inhaled sharply, fighting tears as he took in these chilling relics of obsession. As they searched further, George noticed something strange about a large wooden bookcase standing oddly against a far wall, its placement unnatural amidst the disorder. Curious, he stepped closer, heart pounding painfully, and touched the bookcase gently, feeling it shift slightly under pressure. "Sarah, look at this," George said urgently, stepping aside as she approached. Together, they pushed the heavy piece, hearing hinges groan as it swung slowly outward, revealing a concealed door hidden behind. A sense of foreboding filled Sarah, matched only by George's fearful anticipation. Carefully, Sarah pushed open the hidden door, exposing a narrow staircase descending into pitch darkness. "We need flashlights," Sarah instructed quietly, signaling her team to provide them. Her heart hammered against her ribs, instincts warning her about what awaited below. Together, Sarah and George descended slowly into the basement's gloom, beams of light slicing through shadows, illuminating brick walls and dirt floors. The air felt colder, heavy with unspoken secrets. Their footsteps echoed softly, punctuating the tense quiet. Suddenly, their light settled upon another door, smaller and locked tight, clearly reinforced with steel. Sarah cautiously tried the handle, confirming it wouldn't budge. Without hesitation, the team prepared to break it down, urgency now dominating their actions. A resounding crash shattered the silence as the door finally gave way. Dust swirled upward, temporarily obscuring their vision. As it cleared, their flashlights revealed a sight that stopped them cold. Rows of shelves lined the small room, filled meticulously with notebooks, photographs, and personal items, each labeled precisely with names and dates painstakingly cataloged. mementos of Miller's dark obsessions. George's breath shook, the sight overwhelming him. Sarah quickly surveyed the disturbing collection, her eyes narrowing with grim determination. Then, in a corner partially hidden by shadows, her flashlight illuminated a final chilling detail, a second reinforced door, its presence ominously demanding attention. Stepping forward cautiously, Sarah's pulse quickened as she examined this door. It, too, was locked firmly, promising secrets even more troubling hidden beyond. George stood frozen beside her, heart racing painfully as dread clawed at his throat. "Whatever he's hidden behind this door," Sarah whispered, her voice steady despite the palpable tension. Patrick Miller never intended for it to be discovered. Exchanging a final glance filled with apprehension and resolve, George nodded slowly, silently urging her forward. Sarah reached for the handle, knowing the truth they had long sought lay just inches beyond. As they prepared to breach the final barrier, the weight of decades of buried secrets pressed upon them heavily. Neither Sarah nor George could yet comprehend the full horror awaiting discovery, a truth hidden meticulously for 27 years, now poised to erupt violently into the light. As Sarah's fingers gripped the handle of the reinforced door, George stood frozen behind her, every heartbeat echoing painfully in his chest. A heavy, oppressive silence enveloped them, broken only by their shallow, anxious breaths. Sarah pushed. Firmly, the door creaked slowly open, revealing a narrow corridor bathed in darkness, thick with the scent of dampness and decay. Their flashlights illuminated walls lined with faded wallpaper, peeling and streaked with mold. The cold, stale air filled their lungs, suffocating their senses with dread. Carefully stepping forward, Sarah's beam swept across shelves cluttered with photographs, hundreds of them. George approached closer, recognizing his daughter's youthful faces smiling innocently from images clearly captured without their knowledge. The photos became increasingly unsettling, zoomed-in close-ups of the sisters' faces, blurry shots from behind bushes or trees. George trembled, his knees weakening beneath the weight of a horror he never imagined could exist. Beside the photographs, meticulous notes written in Patrick Miller's neat handwriting detailed his obsessive surveillance of the Collins sisters. Every page turned exposed more chilling confessions, unsettling accounts of his dark fixation. He was watching them for years. Sarah murmured softly, voice edged with disbelief, long before they disappeared. George swallowed hard, unable to speak. His eyes drifted to scattered personal items that belonged unmistakably to his daughters, a small pink comb Lisa always carried, a notebook Anna had cherished, a bracelet Julie treasured. These intimate relics made his heart twist painfully, confronting him again with the depth of Miller's twisted devotion. Suddenly, a muffled sound shattered the dreadful stillness. Sarah and George froze simultaneously, exchanging startled glances. "Did you hear that?" George whispered urgently. Sarah raised her flashlight toward another door hidden in shadows at the end of the corridor. "Over there," she said softly, gesturing cautiously, heart hammering wildly. George followed closely behind Sarah as they approached the second door. Sarah's fingers brushed against the cold metal knob, her pulse racing. She turned it gently, and the door swung slowly open, revealing another dimly lit room. The weak glow of an old lamp barely illuminated the space, shadows dancing on rough concrete walls. Inside, they could hear clearer sounds now, soft, uncertain movements, the hesitant shuffling of feet. George's breath caught sharply. From the shadows emerged three figures, thin, frail, their pale faces partially hidden behind tangled, disheveled hair. Their eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief, stared back at the intruders. George's flashlight trembled violently, tears instantly blurring his vision. His heart recognized them before his mind fully could. Anna, Julie, and Lisa. They had aged. Their youthful vibrance had been stolen, replaced by haunted gazes reflecting decades of isolation. George sank to his knees, overcome by a powerful mixture of relief, grief, and overwhelming guilt. "Girls," he choked out, his voice breaking. "It's me. It's Dad." The sisters stood motionless at first, disbelief etched deeply into their faces. Slowly, recognition dawned upon them. Anna stepped cautiously forward, her hands shaking. Julie clutched Lisa's arm tightly, uncertainty clouding her eyes, unable to trust their own senses. "Dad?" Anna whispered hesitantly, voice weak, cracked by years of silence and fear. Her eyes searched his face, struggling to reconcile memories faded by time. George opened his arms gently, nodding desperately, eyes brimming with tears. The sisters finally moved forward, hesitantly, their steps uncertain, each movement heavy with years of trauma. When they reached him, they collapsed together into an embrace filled with tentative warmth and painful confusion. Tears flowed silently, blending sorrow and fragile joy in the quiet aftermath of their reunion. Sarah gave them space, respectfully retreating slightly, radioing urgently for support. Meanwhile, George gently cupped each daughter's face in his trembling hands, absorbing the painful reality of their lost years etched deeply into their expressions. Over the next tense hours, as officers secured the property, the sisters recounted fragments of their harrowing captivity. Each revelation deepened George's anguish. Miller's meticulous manipulation unfolded through their hesitant narratives. From their first terrified days after being taken, locked away beneath the very town they once called home, to the relentless psychological torment designed to strip away their identities. Anna spoke softly, eyes distant, describing Miller's twisted stories, lies convincing them no one searched, no one cared. Julie wept quietly, confessing her confusion as Miller convinced them their family had moved on, forgotten them, replacing love with indifference. Lisa's voice trembled, recounting her desperate attempts to shield her sisters from his manipulative cruelty, her strength tested and battered repeatedly by Miller's systematic emotional warfare. George listened silently, horrified by the depths of their suffering. Every heartbreaking detail tore at him, amplifying his guilt for not protecting them, for being unable to rescue them sooner. He struggled to comprehend the monstrous cruelty inflicted upon his daughters, the irreversible psychological wounds etched into their souls. By nightfall, the sisters had been gently escorted from their underground prison, wrapped carefully in blankets, their frail forms supported tenderly by medical personnel. The entire town, alerted by sirens and lights illuminating Miller's darkened property, watched in stunned silence as the impossible reunion unfolded. Fairview Park, once again, became gripped by shock and sorrow, reliving the trauma of decades past. Residents gathered at the police barricades, whispering prayers and silent apologies, painfully aware of their ignorance and complacency. Inside the ambulance, George sat beside his daughters, desperately holding their fragile hands, vowing silently to protect them forever. Yet, despite his profound relief, an unsettling distance remained, an emotional chasm widened by years apart, manipulation, and unimaginable pain. At the hospital, surrounded by quiet medical personnel, the sisters struggled to adjust, their movements hesitant, frightened. Conversations were sparse, punctuated by uncertain glances toward George, silently questioning whether they could trust the reality around them. Later that evening, alone with George, Anna finally broke the tense silence, her voice fragile yet deeply anguished. "Dad," she whispered, eyes lowered, "why didn't anyone look for us?" George stared at her, stunned, heart shattered by the accusation underlying her question. Julie added softly, her voice trembling, "He said nobody wanted us anymore, that we were forgotten." Lisa's gaze lifted slowly, haunted eyes filled with vulnerability and lingering distrust. Was it true? She asked quietly, her voice barely audible. Did you stop looking? Did everyone just forget? George's heart twisted painfully, the weight of their heartbreaking confusion nearly unbearable. The sisters' fragile trust had been meticulously dismantled over 27 horrific years. Miller's poisonous lies seeped deep into their consciousness, making them doubt even their father's love. No, George finally whispered, voice breaking as tears streamed down his face. Not a single day passed without me thinking of you, hoping, praying. I never stopped looking. I never stopped loving you. Yet, despite his desperate reassurances, the girl's eyes revealed lingering shadows of uncertainty, their trauma deeply embedded. Miller's psychological damage profound and complex. That night, beneath the sterile hospital lights, George realized their battle was far from over. The emotional wounds inflicted upon Anna, Julie, and Lisa stretched deeper than physical scars ever could. Restoring their trust, healing their fractured family, would demand patience, courage, and profound love beyond measure. As the sisters drifted into uneasy sleep, George watched them carefully, heart heavy with the profound awareness that their painful journey toward healing had only just begun. The past held them captive still, its chains of emotional torment tightly bound. They were, in many ways, still prisoners of Patrick Miller's cruel legacy. The truth had finally been uncovered, but freedom remained disentangled, fragile, waiting desperately for redemption and understanding to gently, painstakingly unravel the darkness that still enveloped them all. The first months after Anna, Julie, and Lisa were freed from their decades-long captivity were delicate and intensely emotional, marked by gradual and painful adjustments. Every morning brought fresh challenges, small triumphs, and inevitable setbacks, as they navigated the overwhelming task of rediscovering a world that had drastically changed without them. Initially, the sisters spent weeks sheltered within the quiet safety of George's home, still filled with echoes of their teenage years. George moved slowly and gently, knowing instinctively they needed patience and understanding. Yet, despite his deep love, George often felt helpless as he watched his daughters struggle through emotional storms, triggered by mundane sights or sounds that brought back traumatic memories. Anna retreated frequently into quiet corners, clutching faded journals found in her untouched bedroom. She rediscovered writing as an outlet for emotions too difficult to speak aloud. Her pen traced words cautiously at first, hesitant phrases revealing her struggle with deep sadness and anxiety. Yet, slowly, her poetry evolved, capturing glimmers of fragile hope and resilience emerging from the darkness of her past. Julie oscillated between vibrant optimism and episodes of profound despair. Her spirit, naturally adventurous and bright, fought fiercely against the lingering shadows. But unexpected sounds, a door closing, a footstep on stairs, sent her spiraling back into panic and confusion. On calmer days, she quietly explored the garden, barefoot as always, gradually reconnecting with sensations of grass beneath her feet, reminding herself gently that freedom was real. Lisa, ever protective and careful, assumed a role of quiet strength, though she too carried deep scars beneath her outward composure. Her fear of water intensified after years spent locked underground. Yet, she bravely faced each painful trigger, determined to help her sisters overcome their own obstacles. Lisa's quiet bravery inspired George profoundly, her courage silently teaching him how healing required persistent patience above all else. Fairview Park reacted with stunned disbelief and profound relief to the sisters' miraculous return. The community, grappling with guilt and joy simultaneously, watched closely, unsure how to support the family effectively. Media attention flooded the town, casting uncomfortable spotlights that intensified pressure on the family's already fragile emotional balance. Recognizing their vulnerability, Sarah Campbell became the sisters' protector, tirelessly shielding them from overwhelming attention. Her bond with the Collins family deepened profoundly, transitioning from investigator to trusted friend, a quiet source of stability for both George and the girls. The community eventually organized a gentle, candlelit vigil at Fairview Central Park, a symbolic act of collective healing. Hundreds gathered quietly beneath a clear starlit sky, candles flickering softly as neighbors spoke tenderly about loss, forgiveness, and resilience. At its heart, Anna, Julie, Lisa, and George stood closely together, each holding a flickering candle, tears silently tracing paths down their faces, finally feeling the warmth and sincerity of community support. Over time, with professional counseling and careful familial guidance, the sisters began rediscovering their voices and individuality. Sessions with therapists unraveled the complex psychological manipulation Patrick Miller had inflicted, revealing the meticulous cruelty behind his actions. Miller's twisted charisma and carefully constructed lies had allowed him to maintain control, convincing the sisters that the world beyond his basement had abandoned them. His obsessive secrecy, reinforced by isolation and psychological coercion, explained how he remained undetected for nearly 3 decades. As each revelation emerged, George struggled deeply with guilt for not seeing through Miller's facade. But Anna, Julie, and Lisa, with growing emotional maturity, gently reassured their father, reminding him repeatedly he was as much a victim as they were. Through shared pain, the family's emotional bond strengthened, tempered by mutual compassion and understanding. Small moments of shared meals, cautious laughter, and rediscovered simple joys begin to heal the Collins family. Over time, the sisters decide they must confront their deepest trauma by revisiting the abandoned Fairview Community Pool Club. At twilight, they enter together, Lisa leading with newfound resolve, Julie drawing strength from her siblings, and Anna absorbing every painful memory. Beside the drained pool, they reclaim their past, affirming their survival and defying their captor's legacy. George embraces them, moved by their courage. Their silent walk through the ruins brings cathartic peace. The visit cannot erase the past but restores their power and dignity. Under starlight, George promises they will face the future together. The family leaves, emotionally lighter, knowing their scars remain, but believing love and forgiveness will guide their new beginning.